63 people were told I was dead. My mother sent the message on a Thursday evening family group chat. Every aunt, every cousin, every deacon from Greater Bethel AME Church who had held my hand at Sunday service since before I could read. Y'all pray for us. We lost our Celeste last Thursday. She gone. The streets took her. I didn't find out until 8 months later when I surfaced from an undercover assignment and powered on my phone for the first time since April. 412 notifications. Rest in peace, baby girl. Gone too soon. Lord have mercy on that family. She was always so troubled. I read every single one. I sat in my car in the APD parking garage on Peachtree Street in full detective's uniform badge, still pinned to my chest from the morning briefing, and I read every single one. My mother had not called Atlanta PD to verify. My father had not called the hospital. Not one person in that chat of 63 had picked up the phone to check whether I was actually breathing. But my brother Marcus, the one who had started the rumor, had already moved on. He was graduating in 6 days. And I had just decided I was going to be there. Before I tell you what was inside that folder with his name on it, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Drop a comment below. Now let me take you back to where it all started. 3 months after Marcus's arrest, the case went to trial. He did not contest the charges. His attorney entered a guilty plea on all counts: wire fraud, financial exploitation of elderly and vulnerable adults operating an unlicensed investment scheme in the state of Georgia. The sentencing hearing lasted 40 minutes. The judge, a woman named the Honorable Patricia Osei-Menzies, read the victim impact statements aloud before announcing the sentence. There were 17 of them. She read every single one. Sister Delphine Watkins' statement was the third one read. She had written it by hand in careful cursive on lined paper. Her granddaughter had brought her to the courthouse that morning. She sat in the second row in a gray wool coat and a small pearl brooch, and she listened to her own words being read aloud in a federal courtroom with the particular dignity of a woman who has survived many things and intends to survive this one too. Marcus received 22 months in a federal correctional facility and was ordered to make full restitution to all 17 victims, $231,000 to be repaid through a structured garnishment of his wages and assets following his release. I was not in the courtroom. Priya had offered to let me attend as the originating officer on the case. I declined. My part had been the investigation, the documentation, the arrest. What happened inside that courtroom belonged to the 17 people Marcus had taken from. It was their morning. I had no need to be there. I spent that morning instead at my desk in the Major Crimes Unit working a new case, a missing persons matter in Buckhead that had 3 inconsistencies in the initial report, and a 4th one I had found myself at 11 o'clock the previous night. I worked it the way I worked everything carefully, completely, without announcement. Priya texted me the sentence at 2:17 in the afternoon. I read it. I set my phone face down on my desk. Then I picked it back up and sent one message to a number I had not texted in 3 weeks. It's done. The response came in 40 seconds. I know, Louise from the church already called me. You okay? I smiled at my phone in the middle of the Major Crimes bullpen, which was not something I did often enough. I'm good, Grandma, I wrote back. I'm real good. Grandma Cora May passed away on a Thursday evening in March, 11 weeks after the sentencing. She had been declining slowly since the previous autumn. Her heart, her doctor said, had simply been working harder than it should, for longer than most hearts are asked to. She went quietly in her own bed in the house in Eatonton with the television on the evening news channel she had watched every night for 30 years. Her neighbor, Miss Eunice, was with her. She was not alone. I drove to Eatonton the next morning. I sat in her kitchen for a long time before I could do anything else. The teacups were still in the dish rack. Her reading glasses were folded on the kitchen table. Her blue Buick was in the driveway keys on the hook by the back door. Everything arranged with the same quiet intentionality she had brought to every aspect of her life, as if even in leaving, she had made sure the house was in order. The will had been filed with a probate attorney in Milledgeville 2 years earlier. There were no surprises, because Grandma Cora had not been a woman who believed in leaving important things to chance. The house and the full 72 acres of property in Eatonton passed to me as primary beneficiary exactly as the updated deed had specified. Marcus was not named. My parents received several personal items: her mother's Bible, a set of china she had received as a wedding gift in 1968, a small amount of cash she had set aside specifically for them, with a handwritten note that said simply, "Take care of each other." My mother called me the evening after the will reading. She had been crying. I could hear it in the particular flatness of her voice that follows a long cry when the emotion has exhausted itself. And what remains is just the person unguarded. She did not ask about the land. She said, "I keep thinking about what Mama saw in you that I didn't let myself see." I sat with that for a moment. "She saw what was there," I said. "That's all." "I should have looked harder." "Yes," I said, "you should have." There was a long silence between us. Not an uncomfortable one. The kind of silence that exists between two people who have finally said the true thing and are both sitting with the weight of it. "I'm not asking to go back to how things were," my mother said. "I know that's not what you want. I needed you to know that I understand now. What I did. What I didn't do." Her voice caught once. "I'm sorry, Celeste. I am genuinely sorry." "I know, Mama," I said, and I meant it. Not as a door reopening, not as permission for things to return to the shape they had been, but as the truth I did know. I believed her, and believing her was enough for now. My father came to see me in April. He drove himself up from Vine City to East Atlanta on a Sunday afternoon, unannounced, which was the most surprising thing about it. He knocked on my door with a paper grocery bag in one hand and a framed photograph in the other. Inside the bag were the ingredients for smothered pork chops. I stared at the bag for a long moment. He said, "I thought maybe I could cook, if that's all right." I stepped back from the door and let him in. He cooked in my kitchen for 2 hours. We did not talk about Marcus. We did not talk about the graduation or the group chat or the 14 months. We talked about his work, which was winding down toward retirement. We talked about a documentary he had watched about Reconstruction-era land ownership in Georgia that he said had made him think about things he wished he had thought about sooner. At one point, he looked up from the stove and said without prelude, "You always were the one, Celeste. I just didn't know how to say it while your mother was still figuring it out." I didn't respond immediately. Then I said, "I know, Daddy." He nodded and went back to the stove. After we ate, he placed the framed photograph on my kitchen table. It was a picture of Grandma Cora May taken at the last family reunion in Eatonton 3 summers ago. She was standing at the edge of the pecan grove in the late afternoon light looking at something off to the side, smiling at something only she could see. He said, "She asked me to give you that, before she passed. Said you'd know where to put it." I picked it up. I carried it to my desk and set it beside the frame commendation and the notarized property deed. 3 things. 3 different languages saying the same truth. I was here. I had always been here. I still work major crimes. I still drive the charcoal gray Ford F-150. I still live in East Atlanta, though I am saving towards something larger now because 72 acres in Eatonton require stewardship, and stewardship requires resources, and I've always been good at building things slowly and surely toward a purpose. I go to Eatonton on weekends sometimes. I walk the property alone in the early morning when the Georgia light is just starting and the pine trees are still and the pecan groves hold the night cold for another hour before the sun reaches them. I think about Isaiah Dupree, about what it costs to hold something, about what it means to receive it. I think about Grandma Cora sitting on that porch telling me not to let anybody sort me. I am 30 years old now. I know exactly who I am. And for the first time in my life, that knowledge does not require anyone else's confirmation to hold. You can love someone and still choose not to carry what they refuse to put down themselves. Family is not just blood. It is who shows up. It is who sees you, who really sees you, and does not look away. Grandma Cora saw me my entire life. That was my inheritance. Everything else was just land. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. I would love to hear from you. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you love? How did it change your life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, check out the video in the description. Until next time, take care of yourself. You deserve it. To understand what Marcus did, you have to understand the family he grew up in. And to understand that family, you have to start with one simple truth in the Dupree household on Mosley Drive in Vine City, Atlanta. There were two kinds of children. The kind that mattered, and the kind that was expected to understand why they didn't. I was the second kind. We were 4 people in a tan brick bungalow, 2 blocks from the old Herndon home site. My father, Ronald Dupree, worked maintenance at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport steady work union wages home by 6 every evening. My mother, Brenda Dupree, ran the hospitality committee at Greater Bethel AME Church and considered the opinion of the congregation to be only slightly less authoritative than Scripture. Then there was Marcus, 2 years younger than me. And then there was me, Celeste, the oldest, the darker one, the one who from the time I was old enough to notice seemed to exist slightly outside the warm circle that everyone else stood inside. I noticed it first in photographs. Every Christmas, my mother printed 1 photo for the mantle, 1 photo to represent the whole year. For 11 years straight, from the time Marcus was born until I left for Spelman College, that photo was of Marcus. Marcus on the first day of school. Marcus in his Pee-wee football uniform. Marcus grinning at somebody's cookout with a paper plate piled high with food. Bright-skinned, bright-eyed, easy to love on sight. I was in the background of some of those photos, slightly out of focus, looking at something off to the side, present but not the point. I told myself it was just the way photos worked. You couldn't put everyone at the center. I almost believed it. The clearer pattern started when I was 11 years old. That was the year I made the honor roll at Frederick Douglass High School's feeder middle school straight A's across every subject, including advanced math, which my teacher, Miss Okafor, said fewer than 10 students had passed at that level all year. I brought the certificate home on a Friday. My mother looked at it, nodded, and set it on the kitchen counter next to the stack of bills. That same evening, Marcus came home with a note from his basketball coach saying he'd been selected for the travel team. My mother called my grandmother Cora May. She called Aunt Tamara. She called 3 women from the church hospitality committee. She cooked Marcus's favorite smothered pork chops with rice and gravy and told him he was going to be something special. My certificate was still on the counter on Monday morning. It had a coffee ring on it from somebody's mug. I picked it up, folded it in half, and put it in my backpack. Nobody noticed. But here is what I want you to understand. My mother was not a cruel woman in the way that word usually sounds. She didn't yell, she didn't call me names. She never once said to my face that she loved Marcus more. What she did was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to argue against. She simply directed her warmth in one direction, consistently, predictably, and I learned the way children learn things that nobody teaches them directly, that my accomplishments were expected. Marcus's accomplishments were celebrated. Expected things don't require acknowledgement. Celebrated things get smothered pork chops and phone calls to the church committee. I learned to bring my certificates home and put them away myself. The colorism piece was something I didn't have full language for until I was in college, but I felt it long before I could name it. Marcus had my mother's complexion warm honey, what the older women at Greater Bethel called good color. I had my father's deep brown, the same shade as Grandma Cora May, which the same older women described with a kind of careful neutrality that said everything. At family reunions down in Eatonton, Georgia, the comparisons were never subtle for long. At the summer reunion when I was 13, my great-aunt Shirley patted Marcus on the cheek and told the table, "This one got the good hair and the bright skin. He gon' do something." Then she looked at me not unkindly, but with the particular assessment of a woman who had sorted people into categories her whole life and said, "Celeste favors the Dupree side. Strong features? She'll have to work for it." The table moved on. Grandma Cora May, sitting at the far end, set down her sweet tea. She didn't say anything to the table. But later when the sun was going down and the adults were playing bid whist on the porch, she found me sitting alone by the old pecan tree at the edge of the property. She sat down beside me in the grass. She didn't ask me how I was feeling. She just said, "Don't you let nobody sort you. You hear me?" I was 13. I nodded, but I didn't fully understand. It would take 16 more years for me to understand completely. Back at home in Vine City, the pattern held. Marcus's travel basketball team needed new shoes. My father drove him to Foot Locker on Cobb Parkway the same week. When I needed new textbooks for my advanced placement courses at Frederick Douglass High, my mother told me to check with the school library first. The library didn't have them. I used photocopies for the rest of the semester. Marcus's ninth grade class trip to Washington, D.C. cost $350. My parents paid it within a week, and my mother packed him a separate bag of snacks for the bus. My 10th grade overnight science camp cost $280. My father said money was tight. I didn't go. I told myself it didn't mean anything. I was wrong, because what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known at 15 sitting in my bedroom on Mosley Drive doing homework by myself, while Marcus watched television in the living room with both my parents laughing at something I wasn't part of, was that Marcus had already begun to understand the dynamic too. He had understood it much faster than I had. And unlike me, he had decided to use it. I didn't know it then. But that summer, something shifted in my brother. Not toward me, he was never directly cruel, not then, but away from any instinct toward fairness, away from anything that might require him to share the spotlight he had been handed without asking for it. The first sign came 3 weeks before I left for Spelman, and I almost missed it entirely. The first sign came 3 weeks before I left for Spelman. I had spent the better part of my junior and senior year writing, not journaling, not creative writing for pleasure, serious work, a 12-page policy analysis on criminal justice reform in Georgia's Fulton County court system examining sentencing disparities across race and income lines. I had used real data. I had cited 19 sources. My AP government teacher, Mr. Ellington, had called it the most rigorous student paper he had seen in 14 years of teaching. He encouraged me to enter it in the Georgia Student Policy Leaders Competition, an annual contest open to high school juniors and seniors across the state, with a first-place prize of $500 and a formal recognition ceremony at the state capitol. I submitted it in February. I didn't tell anyone in my family. I had learned by then that announcing my efforts before they produced results only created opportunities for indifference I wasn't ready to absorb. In April, I received a letter. Second place. A certificate, a formal letter of recognition from a state senator's office, and a check for $250 made out to Celeste Avery Dupree. I was 17 years old. I had never held a check with my name on it before. I put the letter and the check on the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. My mother was cooking. My father was in the living room. Marcus was somewhere in the back of the house. My mother read the letter. She said, "That's nice, baby," and then went back to stirring the pot. My father looked up from the television, said, "Good job," and looked back down. That was it. No phone calls, no smothered pork chops, no post on Facebook. I folded the check and put it in the front pocket of my backpack. I ate dinner. I did the dishes. I went to bed. What I did not know, what I would not find out until 3 weeks later, the morning I was loading my bags into my uncle's truck to drive to Spelman, was that Marcus had found a copy of that paper. I had printed a second copy and left it in the shared printer in the hallway. I forgot about it. Marcus did not. He had entered the same paper word for word, my words, my research, my 19 citations into a separate local essay competition run by a civic organization in the West End neighborhood, a competition I had never heard of. He had typed his name at the top, removed mine, and submitted it 6 weeks after I had submitted mine to the state competition. He placed first. $500, a small ceremony at a rec center on Cascade Road, 40 people in folding chairs. My mother in her good church hat, my father in his one good blazer, both of them in the front row clapping. I found out the morning I was leaving because Aunt Tamara mentioned it while helping carry boxes. "Your brother won that writing contest," she said. "The way you say something, you assume the other person already knows." Brenda was so proud. They had a whole little ceremony. I stopped walking. I stood on the front porch of that tan brick bungalow on Mosley Drive with a duffel bag in each hand, and I did the math, the timeline, the paper, his name at the top. I went inside. I found Marcus in the kitchen eating cereal. "That essay contest," I said. "The one in West End." He looked up. His expression did not change. "Yeah, that was my paper." He took another spoonful of cereal. "I changed some stuff." "Marcus, that was my paper. Every word." He shrugged. "You already entered yours somewhere else. I needed something to submit. You weren't using it anymore." I stood there for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. You won $500 with my work, I said. You got $250 with yours. He put his bowl in the sink. Seems like we're even. I walked out of that kitchen. I found my mother in the hallway. I told her what Marcus had done, clearly, calmly, every detail. She listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Celeste, today is not the day. You're leaving in an hour. Don't start something you can't finish. He stole my paper, Mama. He's 17 years old. He made a mistake. You want to leave for college with this kind of ugliness between you and your brother. I looked at her for a long time. She held my gaze with the particular expression she reserved for situations where she had already decided the outcome and was simply waiting for me to accept it. I picked up my bags and walked out to my uncle's truck. My father hugged me goodbye. My mother straightened my collar and told me to call when I arrived. Marcus stood in the doorway and raised one hand. I did not look back. At Spelman, I found what I did not know I had been missing. I was surrounded by Black women who were sharp and driven and unapologetically themselves. Women who had grown up the smart one, the serious one, the one who was expected to achieve without being celebrated for it. For the first time in my life, my effort was not quietly noted and set aside. It was matched and raised by every person around me. I majored in criminal justice. I made the dean's list every semester. I joined the pre-law society, then left it when I realized what I actually wanted was not a courtroom but a crime scene. I wanted to be the person who found the truth before anyone else had the chance to bury it. My mother called every 2 weeks. The conversations were short. She asked if I was eating. She told me what was happening at Greater Bethel. She mentioned Marcus always. Marcus, his new job at a cell phone store in Buckhead, his new girlfriend, his plans to start college soon this time for real. She never once asked about my grades. I stopped mentioning them. In my junior year at Spelman, I applied for a summer internship with the Atlanta Police Department's Community Liaison Division. I was one of 11 students selected from a pool of over 200 applicants across Georgia. I didn't tell my parents until the first day of the internship when I sent a single text with a photo of me in front of the APD building on Peachtree Street. My father replied with a thumbs-up emoji. My mother replied 4 hours later, "Be careful." Marcus did not reply at all, but Grandma Cora May, who had a flip phone she only used for calls and who had somehow figured out how to receive picture messages, called me that same evening from Eatonton. She was breathing hard the way she did when she was excited. "I showed everybody at the senior center," she said. "Told them that's my grandbaby, standing right in front of that building." I laughed for the first time in weeks. "You keep going, Celeste," she said. Her voice dropped to the soft register she used when she meant something completely. "Don't you stop for nobody." I didn't stop, but I had no idea what was already growing in my absence. Back in Vine City, Marcus had finally enrolled at Georgia Perimeter College, and he had started paying very close attention to something I had not noticed. I was teaching him the precise and particular art of making people believe in you without giving them any real reason to. The worst part was not what he had already done. The worst part was what he was about to do next. I graduated from Spelman College on a Saturday morning in May, under a sky so blue it looked painted. 312 women in white dresses and royal blue stoles crossed that stage. When my name was called Celeste Avery Dupree Criminal Justice Magna Cum Laude, I walked to the center of that stage, and I stood there for exactly 3 seconds longer than I needed to. Not for drama, just to feel it. Just to let it be real before it became memory. My parents were in the audience. Row 14. I had sent them tickets 6 weeks earlier with a handwritten note giving them the time, the parking instructions, and the dress code. My mother wore her ivory church hat. My father wore his good blazer. They clapped when my name was called. They left before the reception. My mother sent a text from the car. "We had to beat the traffic. So proud of you, baby. Dinner Sunday." I stood at the reception in my white dress, holding a glass of sparkling cider, and read that text 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the table and talked to my classmates for 2 hours. I laughed. I took photographs. I let my roommate Jasmine's mother hug me and tell me I was going to change the world. But something had cracked open inside me that afternoon. Something quiet and final. Not rage, I wasn't there yet. Just a settling. a recognition, the way you finally stop waiting for a bus that has never once run on schedule and simply start walking. I was done waiting for my parents to show up in the way I needed them to. I did not know yet that Marcus was about to make that decision very easy to keep. After Spelman, I entered the APD Police Academy. 13 weeks of the hardest physical and mental conditioning of my life. I graduated in the top 5 of my class. I was assigned to the Zone 3 precinct in Kirkwood, long shifts, difficult calls, the full weight of what it meant to do that work in a city like Atlanta. I was good at it. Quietly, steadily good at it, the way I had always been good at things nobody in my family thought to celebrate. Marcus, meanwhile, was struggling. He had started at Georgia Perimeter College with stated plans to study business. He changed his major twice in the first year. He stopped attending classes the following spring, citing what he told my mother was a mental health break, a phrase my mother accepted completely and without question, the same woman who had told me to figure out my own textbooks. He moved back into the house on Mosley Drive. My parents paid his portion of the household bills. They bought him a used Nissan Altima so he could get back on his feet. My mother told me about the car on one of our biweekly calls in the same tone she might use to describe buying new curtains. I said nothing. I was paying $1,100 a month for a one-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta, covering every bill myself on a patrol officer's salary. I had not asked my parents for money since I was 17 years old. I did not say any of that, but Marcus was not simply drifting. He was observing. He had a gift I had not recognized until much later, the gift of watching how trust worked and then inserting himself into its mechanics. He watched the way the older members of Greater Bethel AME responded to a young man who spoke scripture and made eye contact and remembered their names. He watched the way people at the church's Thursday afternoon financial literacy workshop, mostly women in their 50s and 60s, mostly working class, mostly suspicious of banks and quietly holding on to small savings, leaned forward when someone young and confident told them there was a better way to grow their money. Marcus enrolled at Georgia Perimeter College for the second time. He redeclared his major as business administration. He told the congregation he was turning his life around. My mother announced it at Sunday service. People clapped, and then he started the investment meetings. He called them financial empowerment sessions. He held them in the basement of Greater Bethel on Tuesday evenings with printed handouts and a whiteboard and a portable projector he borrowed from the church audio team. He talked about passive income. He talked about generational wealth, a phrase that lands with particular weight in Black communities, where generational wealth has been systematically stripped away for over a century. He told people their money could triple in 18 months, through a private fund he had access to through a business connection he was vague about, in ways that should have alarmed everyone and alarmed no one. He used our grandmother's name. He told people that Grandma Cora Mae Dupree, whose family had held land in Eatonton since Reconstruction, whose name carried genuine weight among the older generation of that church, had personally endorsed his approach to building family wealth. He said it casually, the way you mention something that needs no elaboration. Grandma Cora had done no such thing. She didn't know he was using her name until I told her, but I didn't find out until much later. By then, 17 members of Greater Bethel AME had given Marcus money. The smallest amount was $3,000. The largest was $22,000. Total $230,000. Every cent of it sitting in an account Marcus controlled. Not invested, not growing, spent. But before all of that unraveled, there was an afternoon in Eatonton I need to tell you about. The summer after my second year on the force, I drove down to visit Grandma Cora Mae at the family property, 72 acres of red Georgia clay and pine trees and old pecan groves that the Dupree family had held since 1883, when Celeste's great-great-grandfather, Isaiah Dupree, had purchased it from a Reconstruction-era land grant program for $40 in a season's labor. The deed had passed down through the family for 5 generations. Grandma Cora was the current primary holder. We sat on her back porch in the early evening the way we always had. Sweet tea, the sound of the pines, the particular quiet of land that has belonged to your people long enough to feel like it breathes. Grandma Cora was 81 years old that summer. Her hands were slower than they used to be, but her eyes were the same, clear and deep, and seeing considerably more than she ever commented on directly. She reached into the pocket of her house dress and produced a folded document. She smoothed it on her knee and held it out to me. It was the property deed, updated, notarized. My name had been added alongside hers as a co-heir and future primary beneficiary. The date on the notarization was 18 months earlier. She had done it quietly without telling anyone. I looked at it for a long time. "Grandma," I said, "does Mama know this is between me and you?" She said simply. Marka, she said in a tone that closed the subject, "is not who I'm leaving this land to." I looked up at her. She met my eyes with an expression I had seen only a few times in my life. The expression of a woman who has watched a situation develop for decades and has made her peace with every implication of what she's about to say. "I see what happens in that house, Celeste. I always have. Your mama loves you. She just loves easier in one direction than the other. That's her burden to carry, not yours." She folded her hands in her lap. "This land is yours. It has always been meant for you. Isaiah would have known it the moment he saw you." I didn't speak for a while. The pecan trees moved in the evening wind. "There's something else," Grandma Cora said. She reached back into her pocket and produced a smaller folded piece of paper, a personal check made out to me for $8,000, her savings, years of careful, quiet accumulation. "For whatever comes next," she said. "Don't tell your mama." I took the check. I held it the way you hold something that you understand is more than its face value. That piece of paper, both of them would mean everything. But only after Marcus decided to tell the world I was dead. 2 years after that evening on Grandma Cora's porch, I was selected for the APD Undercover Narcotics Unit. It was not something I applied for casually. The selection process took 4-month psychological evaluation background review, a series of interviews with senior detectives that felt less like conversations and more like dissections. They wanted to know how I thought under pressure, how I managed my emotions in sustained high-stress environments, whether I could maintain a constructed identity for weeks or months at a time without losing my footing in my own. I passed every evaluation. My supervisor, Lieutenant Adrienne Okafor, no relation to my middle school teacher, though I always found the coincidence worth noting, pulled me aside after the final interview and said, "You have something most candidates don't. You know how to be invisible when you need to be. In this work, that's not a weakness. That's a tool." I thought about my mother's kitchen counter, the coffee ring on my honor roll certificate, 20 years of learning to take up less space. "I've had practice," I said. Lieutenant Okafor nodded once. "Good, you'll need it." The assignment began in early April. I cannot share the specific details of the operation. Even now, parts of it remain sealed, pending ongoing proceedings. But the general structure was this: a narcotics distribution network operating across 3 Atlanta zip codes with connections to suppliers in 2 other states. A PD's major crimes unit had been building the case for 11 months before I was inserted. My role was to establish contact with a mid-level figure in the network, build enough documented trust to access communications and transaction records, and hold that position until the unit was ready to move. To do that, I had to disappear, not metaphorically, operationally. My personal phone was powered down and placed in a sealed evidence bag in Lieutenant Okafor's desk. My apartment lease continued. My rent was handled through a departmental account. My car stayed in a long-term parking structure near Hartsfield-Jackson. For the duration of the assignment, I was not Celeste Avery Dupree APD officer. I was a woman with a different name, a different history, and a different phone number that connected only to my handler. 2 people in my personal life knew I was going under: Lieutenant Okafor, obviously, and Grandma Cora May, because I had driven down to Eatonton the Sunday before the assignment began and sat with her on that back porch one more time. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell Marcus. Operationally, the fewer people who knew, the safer everyone was, including them. I had left a sealed letter with Lieutenant Okafor to be opened and delivered only in the event that something went seriously wrong. The letter explained the situation to my family. It explained that I was not missing. It explained that I was working. Nothing went seriously wrong. What I did not anticipate, what I could not have anticipated, was what Marcus would do with my silence. And the assignment lasted 8 months and 11 days. During that time, I worked. I maintained my cover through 4 separate near compromises, each of which Lieutenant Okafor later described in my performance review as situations where most officers would have pulled out. I did not pull out. I gathered the documentation the unit needed. I did my job with the same quiet, unrelenting thoroughness I had applied to every task since I was 11 years old, putting my honor roll certificate away by myself. In December, the unit moved. 23 arrests across 2 days. The network's primary supplier was taken into custody at a warehouse in Forest Park. Asset seizures totaled $1.4 million. It was the largest single narcotics operation APD's Major Crimes Unit had completed in 6 years. I surfaced on a Wednesday morning in mid-December. Lieutenant Okafor met me at the precinct with a change of clothes, a cup of coffee, and a brief professional nod that I had learned to read as her version of an embrace. "You did good, Dupree," she said. "What did I miss?" I asked. She paused for exactly 1 second too long. "Your personal phone is in my desk," she said. "I think you should look at it before I brief you on anything else." I sat in a small room off the main bullpen. The phone took 3 minutes to power on fully, the screen filled with notifications in waves, text messages, missed calls, voicemails, app alerts, the accumulated digital residue of 8 months of silence, 412 notifications. I scrolled slowly at first, orienting myself the way you scan a room when you first enter it. Friend updates, news alerts, a reminder about a dental appointment I had missed in June, and then the family group chat. I opened it. It took me a moment to understand what I was reading. The messages had a chronology that required reassembly. I went back to the beginning, back to the first week of May, about 3 weeks after I had gone under. Marcus had started slowly. The way someone starts who understands that credibility is built incrementally. The first message was a question directed at the group in the tone of a concerned sibling. "Has anybody heard from Celeste? She hasn't returned my calls in 3 weeks. Just want to make sure she's okay." Reasonable, even loving to the uninformed eye. Several family members responded. They hadn't heard from me either. They suggested maybe I was busy with work. One aunt said I had always been the independent type. Marcus waited 9 days. Then he posted again. "Y'all, I'm real worried. I heard some things through people in her area. I don't want to say nothing till I know for sure. Just pray for her." That message generated 47 responses. Concerned, probing, asking what he had heard. Marcus responded to none of them directly. He let the worry grow unaddressed the way you let a fire catch before you decide where to point it. He waited 11 more days. Then I talked to somebody who knows somebody who saw her. Y'all, I don't know how to say this. I think she's been struggling for a while. I think it got bad. I don't think she wanted anybody to know. The implication was clear. The specific word he was implying was never typed. It didn't need to be. The congregation of Greater Bethel AME and the extended Dupree family filled in the blank themselves with the particular fluency people develop around topics they have watched claim people they love. He waited 3 more weeks. 3 weeks during which the group chat filled with prayer requests and condolences and gentle grieving speculation. During which my mother, who had my APD supervisor's name in her own phone, who could have called the precinct in 30 seconds, sat with that speculation and let it settle into fact. And then on a Thursday evening in early June, she sent the message I had read in the parking garage. "Y'all pray for us. We lost our Celeste last Thursday. She gone. The streets took her." I read the full thread from beginning to end without moving. Then I read it again. I counted the days. Marcus had spent 41 days constructing that story. 41 days of careful incremental misdirection, each step small enough to seem like concern, the cumulative effect devastating enough to bury me without a single provocation that could be directly confronted. He had learned from watching me after all. Not the studying, not the discipline, not the part where you do the work and put the certificate away yourself. He had learned the other thing, the thing I had spent my whole life trying not to become, the art of existing in a space where no one checks your work too closely. I set my phone face down on the table. I sat in that small room for 6 minutes. I know it was 6 minutes because the clock on the wall had a second hand, and I watched it go around 6 full times while I decided what to do next. Then I picked up my phone, walked to Lieutenant Okafor's office, and knocked on the open door. "I need to request a personal case file," I said. "Family related." She looked at me carefully. "You sure?" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "And I need to know when Marcus Jerome Dupree is scheduled to graduate." Lieutenant Okafor did not ask me why I wanted the file. She was that kind of supervisor. The kind who understood that certain questions asked too early close doors that need to stay open. She simply pulled up the departmental database, ran Marcus Jerome Dupree's name, and turned her monitor toward me without comment. No prior arrests, no existing case file. A Georgia driver's license registered to the Musley Drive address. One minor traffic citation from 2019 paid, in full, clean, on the surface. I need 48 hours, I said. You just came off an 8-month undercover, she said. You're supposed to be on mandatory rest protocol for 2 weeks. I know. She looked at me for a long moment. Lieutenant Adrienne Okafor had been with APD for 22 years. She had seen officers make decisions from the wrong place, from anger, from grief, from the particular blindness that comes when something is too personal. She was trying to determine which category I fell into. I held her gaze steadily. I was not angry, not yet. What I felt in that moment was something colder and more precise than anger. It was clarity. The same clarity I felt at the beginning of every undercover assignment, that quiet locking in every variable accounted for every emotion filed and set aside for later. 48 hours, she said finally. You document everything through proper channels. You bring me what you find before you do anything with it. And Dupree, she paused. You are an officer first. Always, I said. I meant it. I spent the next 2 days in the precinct's research room, building the picture piece by piece. Financial records subpoenaed through a colleague in financial crimes who owed me a favor from a case 18 months earlier. Marcus had opened a private business account under the name Dupree Legacy Financial Empowerment Group, LLC, registered with the Georgia Secretary of State in March, 2 months before he had started the Tuesday evening sessions at Greater Bethel AME. The LLC was real in the narrow sense that the paperwork existed. The investment fund it claimed to manage did not. Deposits into the account over 11 months, $231,000. Withdrawals, $228,000. The money had moved in patterns that my colleague in financial crimes identified without hesitation as a classic affinity fraud structure, targeting a tight-knit community. Leveraging trust, extracting funds before the absence of returns became impossible to explain away. 17 depositors. I cross-referenced the names against the Greater Bethel AME membership directory, which was publicly listed on the church's website. 15 of the 17 were current members. The 2 remaining were relatives of members brought in through personal referrals. The youngest depositor was 44 years old. The oldest was 78. One woman, Sister Delphine Watkins, 67 years old, a retired cafeteria worker from Atlanta Public Schools, had deposited $22,000. Her entire liquid savings according to the account statement. She had written in the memo line of her transfer for my grandchildren's future. I sat with that memo line for a long time. Then I kept working. On the second evening, I drove to Eatonton. I needed to see Grandma Cora May before I did anything else. Not for the land, not for the legal documentation, though I brought copies of the deed to keep safe. I needed to see her because she was the only person in my family who had told me the truth my entire life, and I needed to be in the presence of that truth before I did what I was about to do. She was in her kitchen when I arrived making tea. 81 years old, moving slowly but deliberately, the way people move when they have learned that everything worth doing is worth doing with intention. She looked up when I came through the door and did not seem surprised to see me. I figured you'd come, she said. I sat down at her kitchen table. I told her everything. The undercover assignment, the 8 months of silence, the group chat, my mother's message, what I had found in Marcus's financial records, the 17 people, Sister Delphine Watkins and her $22,000. Grandma Cora listened without interrupting. She poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of me and held the other in both hands and listened until I was finished. When I stopped talking, the kitchen was very quiet. He used my name, she said. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. She nodded slowly. One nod deliberate and final, the way you close a door that you do not intend to open again. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. You do what you need to do, she said. Don't you protect him from what he brought on himself. I drove back to Atlanta that night with her hand still warm in my memory. On the third morning, my 48 hours complete, I walked into Lieutenant Okafor's office and placed the documentation on her desk. Every transaction record, every depositor name, the LLC filing, the cross-reference church directory, the memo line from Sister Delphine Watkins. Lieutenant Okafor read through the file without speaking. It took her 11 minutes. Then she looked up. "This is solid," she said. "I know. Financial crimes will want to take lead on the arrest." "I know that too," I said. "I have one request." She waited. "Let me be present for the arrest, not lead." "I'm not asking to run it, just present." I paused. "He told 63 people I was dead. I want him to see that I'm not." Lieutenant Okafor was quiet for a moment. She tapped the edge of the file against her desk twice. A small gesture that I had learned meant she was weighing something she had already decided. "Where is he graduating?" she asked. "Georgia Perimeter College, Decatur campus, Saturday at 10 in the morning. I'll talk to financial crimes," she said. "No guarantees, but I'll talk to them." The warrant was signed on a Friday afternoon. I ironed my uniform that night in my East Atlanta apartment in a kitchen, where every bill was paid and every surface was clean, and nothing belonged to anyone but me. I pressed each crease until it was exact. I polished my badge with the small cloth I kept in my nightstand drawer, the same cloth I had used every working day for 2 years. I held the badge under the lamp for a moment before I pinned it to my jacket. "Detective, Atlanta Police Department Major Crimes Unit." I had earned that title through 8 months of disappearing, through 41 days of being declared dead by the person I had grown up protecting out of habit, through 17 years of certificates with coffee rings on them and empty seats at receptions and text messages sent from cars that had already left the parking lot. I set the badge on my nightstand. I thought about Sister Delphine Watkins, 67 years old, $22,000, a memo line that said, "For my grandchildren's future." I thought about Marcus eating cereal at the kitchen counter. Seems like we're even. I thought about my mother's message. 63 people. Not one phone call to the precinct. Something shifted inside me that night. Not anger, not grief. Something quieter and more permanent than either of those things. I was not going to that graduation for revenge. I was going because the law required someone to go. Because 17 people deserved to have someone go. Because Sister Delphine Watkins' $22,000 deserved someone who would look Marcus Jerome Dupree in the eye and say clearly and on the record that what he had done had a name. And because I was above all else very good at my job, I picked up my badge, I pinned it to my jacket, and I went to sleep. Let me take you back before that Saturday morning, before the warrant, before the ironed uniform and the polished badge. Because the story of how I walked into that graduation hall is also the story of everything I had built, while Marcus was busy telling people I was gone. People assume that living a hidden life means living a small one. They are wrong. The 8 months I spent undercover were the most consequential of my professional life. But the 2 years before that assignment, and the 6 months after I surfaced, were the years I built something that no one in my family had seen coming. Something that existed entirely outside their knowledge of me. Something that had been growing in the silence they had always assumed was emptiness. Let me tell you what I actually was while my mother was accepting condolences at Greater Bethel AME. When I joined APD's patrol division out of Spelman, I was 22 years old, and I knew exactly 3 things with certainty. I knew the law, I knew how to be patient, and I knew that the fastest way to be underestimated is to let people believe their assessment of you is correct. In Zone 3, I worked with a senior detective named Howard Baines, 26 years on the force, the kind of institutional knowledge that exists nowhere in any manual. He took one look at me during my first week and said, "You read rooms fast. You noticed the thing nobody else is watching. You're going to be wasted on patrol." I spent 18 months on patrol. I documented every case I worked with a thoroughness that my supervisors described in my annual reviews, with words like exceptional and unusually disciplined. I cross-referenced. I followed threads that other officers let drop. I closed 4 cold case adjacent matters in my first year that had been sitting unresolved for between 8 months and 2 years. At 24, I was recommended for detective candidacy, the youngest officer in Zone 3 to receive that recommendation in 11 years. I spent the following year in the candidacy process working alongside experienced detectives in the Major Crimes Unit, learning the specific architecture of complex investigations, how to build a case that holds, how to document in ways that leave no room for reasonable doubt, how to sit across from someone who is lying to you and give them no indication that you already know. I was good at that last part. I had been practicing since childhood. I received my detective's shield on a Thursday afternoon in November in a small ceremony in the precinct's second-floor conference room. Lieutenant Okafor pinned the badge to my jacket herself. There were 11 people in the room, colleagues, supervisors, a representative from the union. I had invited one person from my personal life. Grandma Cora May sat in the front row in her Sunday best. She had driven herself up from Eatonton that morning 3 hours on the Interstate 80 years old in the dark blue Buick she had owned since 2007 and refused to replace. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight and her eyes bright. And when Lieutenant Okafor pinned my badge and the room applauded, Grandma Cora May did not clap. She simply looked at me. The way she looked at me said everything that could not be said in a room full of people who had not watched me become who I was. Afterward, in the parking lot, she held my face in both her hands the way she had done since I was small. Her palms were warm and dry and certain. Isaiah would have known, she said. What she always said. Her great-great-grandfather, the man who had bought 72 acres of red Georgia clay for $40 and a season's labor, and held it against every force that tried to take it. I know, Grandma, I said. She drove herself back to Eatonton. I watched her taillights disappear at the end of the block. I stood in that parking lot for a while. I was 26 years old. I had a detective's shield. I had a one-bedroom apartment in East Atlanta that I paid for entirely by myself. I had a Ford F-150 in charcoal gray that I had saved for over 18 months and purchased outright. I had a savings account with $41,000 in it, built from 5 years of living below my means and putting the difference away every single month without exception. My parents did not know about any of it, not the shield, not the savings, not the truck. I had stopped offering my family information about my life the same way I had stopped leaving my certificates on the kitchen counter quietly without announcement after I understood that the information would not be received in the way it deserved. After I surfaced from the undercover assignment and began building the case against Marcus, I was simultaneously being processed for a formal commendation from APD's Major Crimes Unit for the narcotics operation. The commendation was presented at a departmental ceremony in January, 2 weeks after I had sat in the parking garage and read 412 notifications. The ceremony was not large, a conference room, 30 colleagues. Lieutenant Okafor reading the commendation language from a prepared document, a framed certificate, and a formal notation in my permanent record. But the language of that commendation mattered to me in ways I did not fully articulate to anyone. It described in the precise and unsentimental vocabulary of law enforcement documentation what I had done over 8 months and 11 days, the risk I had sustained, the judgment I had exercised, the result I had produced. It was the official record of my existence during the period when my family had decided I was dead. I framed it. I hung it in my apartment on the wall above my desk, next to the deed to the Eatonton property, the one with my name added alongside Grandma Cora's in careful notarized script. 2 documents, 2 different kinds of proof, both of them saying the same thing in different languages. I was here. I had always been here. I was not what anyone had decided I was. The week between receiving the signed warrant and the Saturday graduation, I kept working. I coordinated with Detective Priya Nambiar from the Financial Crimes Unit, the lead on the Marcus case, going over the arrest protocol, the documentation sequence, the processing timeline. Priya was efficient and direct and had no patience for procedural looseness. We had worked adjacent cases twice before, and I trusted her completely. She had reviewed the full file on Marcus. On the second day of our coordination, she pulled up Sister Delphine Watkins's account statement and tapped the memo line with one finger. $22,000, she said. Her entire savings. I know. He told people your grandmother endorsed this. I know that, too. Priya looked at me steadily. She had not worked with me long enough to know my full history. But she was a detective. She read the particular quality of my stillness accurately. You good? She asked. I'm good, I said, and I meant it in the specific way that has nothing to do with comfort. The way that means I am positioned. I am ready. I know exactly what I am doing and why. She nodded. Saturday at 10. Saturday at 10. I confirmed. I spent the Friday evening before the graduation doing something I had not done in a long time. I called Grandma Cora May. She picked up on the second ring. I could hear the television in her background, the evening news, the same channel she had watched every night for 30 years. Tomorrow's the day, I said. I know, she said. I wanted to hear your voice first. She was quiet for a moment. The television murmured behind her. Outside her window in Eatonton, the pine trees would be still in the December cold, the 72 acres dark and quiet, and patient in the way that land is patient, absorbing everything, holding everything, forgetting nothing. You carry yourself with dignity tomorrow, she said. Whatever happens in that room, you carry yourself with dignity. That's all Isaiah ever asked of any of us. Yes, ma'am, I said as hand Celeste. Yes, Grandma. Wear the uniform sharp, she said. Crease pressed, badge polished, you walk in there looking like exactly what you are. I smiled. For the first time in a long time, the smile reached somewhere real. Already done, I said. Saturday morning came in cold and clear. Atlanta in December has a particular quality of light, thin and bright, and without warmth, the kind of light that shows everything exactly as it is with no softness to spare. I was up at 5:45. I made coffee. I stood at my kitchen window in East Atlanta and watched the sky go from black to the particular deep blue that precedes sunrise. And I thought about nothing except the sequence of the morning ahead. Uniform on at 6:30. Badge pinned at 6:32. I checked the crease on both sleeves. I checked the alignment of the badge against the center of my chest. I drank the rest of my coffee standing at the counter. I did not eat. I was not hungry. I drove to the precinct first. Standard protocol before any arrest operation check-in with the lead detective, confirm the warrant is active. Confirm the team. Detective Priya Nambiar was already at her desk when I arrived at 7:15, which did not surprise me. She was the kind of officer who arrived early, not from anxiety, but from precision. She had the file open and the warrant printout clipped to the front of it. Warrant's active, she said without looking up. Judge signed the extension last night to cover the graduation venue. We're clear to execute inside the facility. Team, you and me plus Officers Reyes and Washington for perimeter. We go in plain observation until Marcus's name is called and he's received the diploma. We execute after he steps off the stage. Public setting, minimal disruption, maximum documentation. She looked up. Your lieutenant cleared your presence formally this morning. You're listed as attending officer, not lead. You observe you don't initiate contact unless I direct it. Understood. She studied me for a moment with the same steady appraisal she had used all week. There will be family in that room, she said. People who know you. People who believed you were dead. That is going to produce reactions that are unpredictable. She paused. You hold your position regardless of what those reactions are. I will. I need you to mean that. I looked at her directly. I have been holding my position in unpredictable situations my entire life, Priya. Today is the first time I'll be doing it in uniform. She held my gaze for one more second. Then she nodded and closed the file. Georgia Perimeter College Decatur campus, she said. We leave at 8:30. The graduation ceremony was held in the college's main gymnasium, a large open hall that seated approximately 300 people on folding chairs arranged in rows facing a raised stage. Blue and gold streamers along the walls, a podium draped in the school's colors, the processed institutional warmth of a building full of people who had arrived for something that mattered to them. We entered through the side service door at 9:47. Officers Reyes and Washington took positions near the main entrance and the emergency exit on the east wall. Priya and I moved to the far right edge of the room, standing against the wall in plain view, not concealed, not announced, present, waiting. The ceremony had already begun. The dean was at the podium delivering the formal address. The graduates were seated in rows to the left of the stage, approximately 120 of them, in black caps and gowns arranged alphabetically. I scanned the audience. My mother was in the fourth row from the front left of center. She was wearing the ivory church hat. the wide-brimmed one, the special occasions hat. Beside her sat my father in his one good blazer, his program held in both hands. Behind them, in the 5th and 6th rows, I counted 11 people I recognized. Aunts, cousins, 2 deacons from Greater Bethel AME. Aunt Tamara was there in a red dress. The woman beside her I recognized as Sister Louise from the Church Hospitality Committee, who had known my mother for 30 years. None of them had seen me yet. I was against the wall at an angle in an area of the room that did not draw natural attention. I stood still and waited. The dean's address concluded. The class president spoke a young woman in the front row who delivered her remarks with the particular confidence of someone who had earned every word. The audience applauded. My father applauded. My mother dabbed at her eye with a folded tissue, moved by someone else's daughter achieving something, in a room where she believed her own daughter no longer existed. I watched that. I filed it away. The diploma presentation began at 10:23. The MCA faculty member in academic regalia began calling names in alphabetical order. The graduates rose one by one and crossed the stage. Family members cheered. Camera phones lifted above heads in rows. The gymnasium filled with the repeated bright percussion of applause. D names began at 10:31. I straightened. Priya shifted her weight slightly to her left. I saw her hand move to her jacket, not to her weapon, just a readiness adjustment. The unconscious physical preparation of an officer about to act. Marcus Jerome Dupree. The name came through the gymnasium's speaker system clearly. A surge of applause from the 4th row. My mother rising slightly from her seat, her program clutched in one hand, the ivory hat tilting forward as she leaned toward the stage. My father clapping with the slow, deliberate rhythm of a man who had been waiting for this moment through 6 years of false starts and enrollment lapses. Marcus stood from his seat in the graduate rows. He was wearing his black cap and gown. He was smiling the particular smile of a person who has constructed a version of events in which they are the protagonist and is currently enjoying the scenery. He walked up the steps to the stage with the unhurried ease of someone who has no reason to expect the morning to go any direction other than the one he has planned. He shook the dean's hand. He accepted his diploma. He held it up briefly for the audience, a reflex the way people do, and the applause from his family's rows was the loudest in the building. He turned to walk down the steps on the far side of the stage. He looked toward his family's section, and he saw me. The smile did not disappear immediately. That is the detail I remember most precisely. The smile took approximately 3 seconds to leave his face, which is a long time when you are watching it happen. It went in stages. First the widening stopped, then the warmth drained out of it. Then what remained was not a smile at all, but simply the shape a face makes when the brain has not yet caught up to what the eyes are telling it. He stopped walking. A graduate behind him had to step around him on the stairs. I did not move. I stood against that wall in my pressed uniform, with my badge catching the gymnasium light, and I looked at my brother across 300 people, and I let him see me completely. Not with anger, not with triumph, with the same steady, patient clarity I had brought to every case I had ever worked. Just the facts, just the truth, just what was real standing in a room where a lie had been allowed to breathe for 14 months. He looked at the badge. He looked at my face. He looked at the badge again. Priya stepped forward from the wall. "Mr. Dupree," she said, moving toward him with her credentials already visible. "I'm Detective Nambiar, Atlanta Police Department. We have a warrant for your arrest." The gymnasium noise dropped in waves outward from where we stood, the way sound dies in a space when something unexpected interrupts the frequency everyone was tuned to. The MC at the podium stopped mid-name. The graduates still seated turned in their chairs. 300 heads moved in the particular synchronized way of a crowd registering that something is happening that was not on the program. My mother stood up from her seat. I heard her, before I saw her fully, a sharp intake of breath, the sound of a woman whose nervous system has just processed 2 contradictory and enormous pieces of information simultaneously. Her daughter was alive. Her son was being arrested. She said my name. Just my name. Celeste, in a voice I had not heard her use in a very long time, stripped of the management, stripped of the performance of composure she maintained for the church and the community, and everyone whose opinion had always mattered more than my feelings. Just the raw, unmanaged voice of a woman in shock. I looked at her. I held her gaze for a long moment. Then I looked back at Marcus, because that was where my professional attention was required. And I did not look away again until Priya had read him his rights and Officers Reyes and Washington had moved into position, and the warrant had been executed cleanly and completely in the middle of his graduation ceremony with 300 witnesses and the diploma still in his hand. He did not resist. He did not speak. He looked at the floor. And somewhere behind me, very quietly, I heard my father's program fall from his hands and land on the gymnasium floor. The sound it made was very small. In the silence of that room, it was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The gymnasium did not stay silent for long. 300 people in a room will find their voices again within seconds, even after something that stops time. The murmur began at the edges, people in the back rows who had only caught fragments of what happened turning to each other, piecing it together from what they had seen. Then it moved inward. By the time Officers Reyes and Washington had guided Marcus toward the service exit, the room had reached the particular pitch of a crowd that has witnessed something it does not yet have the full language for, but understands instinctively to be significant. The MC at the podium said something into the microphone that I did not fully register. The ceremony clearly was paused. Priya touched my arm once, a brief professional contact that communicated without words. "Your part here is done. The rest is processing and paperwork. You can stand down." I nodded. I kept my position against the wall for another 30 seconds, completing the mental documentation I had been running since we entered the building. Sightlines, witness positions, the sequence of events in the order they had occurred. Then I turned toward the seating area. My mother was standing in the 4th row. She had not moved from the spot where she had risen when she first heard my name. The ivory church hat was still on her head. The program was crushed in her right fist. Her face held an expression I had never seen on her before, not in 29 years of watching her manage every situation from Sunday service to family crisis, with the practiced composure of a woman who understood that how you appeared in public was a form of protection. That composure was gone. What was underneath it was something much older and much less controlled. Her eyes were moving between the service exit where Marcus had just disappeared, and my face as if her vision could not settle, as if looking at either thing too long made the other one less real. My father was still seated. He had not picked up his program from the floor. He sat with his hands on his knees and his head slightly bowed in the posture of a man absorbing something that has not finished arriving. The family rose behind my parents. Aunt Tamara, the deacons, Sister Louise from the hospitality committee were a study in the specific social paralysis of people who are witnesses to a private family rupture in a public setting and do not know which way to look. I walked toward my mother, not quickly, not with any visible emotion. I walked the way I had learned to walk toward difficult things steadily with my full weight behind each step, not performing composure, but actually containing it. She watched me cross the space between us. When I reached her row, I stopped at the end of it. I did not sit down. I stood where she could see me fully, the uniform, the badge, the pressed creases, the whole professional fact of what I was. Celeste. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I'm alive, Mama, I said. I have been this whole time. She flinched. A small involuntary movement, like someone who has touched something unexpectedly hot. I didn't know, she said. I didn't know what, Marcus? You didn't call the precinct I said, not as an accusation, as a fact, the same way I would state any fact in any report. You had my supervisor's name. You had the precinct number. You have had both of those things for 3 years. Her mouth opened, closed. One call, I said. That's all it would have taken. One call and someone would have told you I was on assignment, that I was alive, that nothing had happened to me. I paused. You didn't make that call. I believed him. Her voice cracked on the last word. He's my son, he told me. I know what he told you. I kept my voice even. I read every message, all 14 months of it. Beside her, my father finally lifted his head. His eyes found mine and stayed there. He looked older than he had the last time I had seen him, the last Christmas I had attended, before the undercover assignment, when I had sat at the table on Mosley Drive and eaten my mother's cooking and watched Marcus receive the last of the good serving portions without anyone noticing they had done it. My father looked like a man who had been holding something heavy for a very long time and had just been told he could set it down and now was not certain his arms would work correctly. "Celeste," he said. His voice was low. "I'm sorry," I looked at him. My father had said those two words to me exactly once before in my life when I was 9 years old, and he had forgotten to pick me up from school, and I had waited on the front steps for 2 hours until a teacher called the house. He had said it the same way then. Simply, without architecture, just the words undefended. It was I realized the truest thing he knew how to offer. "I hear you, Daddy," I said. Behind my parents, Aunt Tamara had risen from her seat. Her face was doing several things at once: shock recognition, the rapid internal recalibration of someone who had participated in a mourning process and now understood it had been constructed from a lie. Sister Louise beside her had her hand pressed flat over her mouth. I addressed the row directly. "Marcus has been arrested on charges of wire fraud and financial exploitation." I said clearly enough for the immediate rows to hear. "The investigation involves funds taken from members of Greater Bethel AME through an unlicensed investment scheme. If anyone here made a deposit into Dupree Legacy Financial Empowerment Group Detective Nambiar from financial crimes, will need to speak with you. There will be a process for restitution." Sister Louise made a sound that was not quite a word. Aunt Tamara sat back down slowly as if her legs had made a decision her mind was still processing. I turned back to my mother. She was crying now. Not loudly. The contained, effortful crying of a woman who has spent decades believing that public composure is a virtue struggling against an emotion that has decided today is not the day for virtue. "My baby," she said. She reached out one hand toward me. I looked at her hand. I did not step back, but I did not close the distance either. "Mama," I said, "I love you. I have always loved you. That is not the thing that is in question." I kept my voice gentle. Not cold, I was not cold, but clear. The way things need to be clear when they have been unclear for too long. What is in question is whether I can be in your life the way things have been, and the answer is that I cannot. Not anymore. She lowered her hand slowly. "I am not disappearing," I said. "I am not punishing you. I am telling you what I need, which is something I have not been able to do in this family for as long as I can remember." I paused. "When you are ready to hear me, really hear me, without defending Marcus or explaining away what happened, or asking me to consider how things look to the church, you have my number. I will answer." "And until then," she asked. Her voice was very small. "Until then," I said, "you respect that I know where I stand." I looked at my father one more time. He nodded once, the small, private nod of a man who understood more than he had ever said, and was finally, at the cost of this particular morning, being honest about it. I looked at the ivory church hat on my mother's head, the special occasions hat, the hat she had worn to Marcus's ceremony in a room where she had believed I was buried. I thought about Grandma Cora May in the front row at my badge ceremony, sitting with her back straight and her hands folded and her eyes saying everything that could not be said out loud. I thought about 72 acres of red Georgia clay, about Isaiah Dupree, about $40 and a season's labor, and a deed that had held for 5 generations against everything that tried to take it. I thought about Sister Delphine Watkins, 67 years old, $22,000. For my grandchildren's future. I had done what I came to do. I straightened my jacket. I touched my badge once, not a gesture for anyone else, just a private contact, a reminder of what was real. Then I walked back across that gymnasium through the murmuring crowd, past the paused ceremony and the empty stage, and the MC who was still standing at the podium holding his list of names out through the side service door and into the cold December light of a Saturday morning in Decatur, Georgia. I stood on the sidewalk outside the building. I breathed in, I breathed out. For the first time in 29 years, the air did not feel like something I had to negotiate for. It simply filled my lungs. And I let it.